back to PLIN 0006 Introduction to Language. In this short video, we'll just go through some of the organizational and administrative preliminaries of the course, and then I will also be giving you some tips on how you can make the most of the material on this course and ensure that you will succeed. Now, let me first of all briefly introduce the members of staff that you will be having contact with during this course. So first of all, there's of course myself, Florian Bright. I will be the lecturer for this module, and you will see me during the weekly Q&A sessions. You will see me in the weekly lecture videos, and of course you've just seen me already in the welcome video for this module. You'll also be getting in touch with me when you have any sort of issues that you need to talk about that have to do with the course, or if you want to have a one-to-one meeting. Then there will be 2 teaching assistants on the course that you will meet, especially in your tutorials every week. These are first-year PhD students from the Linguistics Department, Elisa Mattiauda and Stefano Castiglione, and you will see them in the tutorial sessions every week, but also occasionally on the forums perhaps, and in the Q&A where they will be assisting me. Then for any administrative matters, you will be in touch with the Linguistics Teaching Office, and there especially with the teaching team lead, Stephanie Agnardi, and they will be taking care of any issues such as when you need an extension or you have extenuating circumstances for something, or perhaps you need to change the time of your tutorial because there is a conflict in your timetable. In all those cases, you'll be contacting the Linguistics Teaching Office. Now, you can find the email addresses for all these people on the Moodle page. So if you go on the Moodle page on the top right-hand side corner, there is a little box that says contact details, and you'll find the names and email addresses of all the staff on the course as well. Now, the principal aim of this module is to give you an introduction to the main areas of linguistics. So that includes phonetics, the study of how speech sounds are produced, phonology, the study of how speech sounds are represented and computed by the mind, morphology, the study of how words are formed, syntax, the study of how sentences are formed, and semantics, the study of linguistic meaning. In the last 4 weeks of the course, we'll then also briefly have a look at some other topics of interest. For example, in the final week of the course, we'll be comparing animal communication to human language. You should, by the end of this course, have a good understanding and a good appreciation of how the scientific method is applied to the study of language. Linguistics, after all, being the scientific study of language. And this should prepare you to take other modules on language and linguistics. So if a little bit later in your degree, for example, you choose to take a module on child language acquisition or a module on phonology, then the basics that you're learning in this module will help you to have a good start and have a good background for those modules. In addition to that, it will also enable you to access the basic literature of the field. So, for example, if you get into child language acquisition later on and you want to read a paper on the so-called WUG test, a WUG being the little animal that's been depicted at the very start of this video on the first slide, then this will enable you to access that literature and have a good understanding of the basic ideas that are at stake and the basic approaches that are available in the field. As for the workload in this module, there are about 175 hours of total work required, and of course some of them are weekly occurrences and some of them are more focused towards the final assessment. So every week you can expect to spend between an hour and an hour and a half watching lecture videos. You can then expect to spend 2 hours in synchronous teaching sessions, so that is 1 hour during a synchronous question and answer session, synchronous just being a fancy term for live, and then you have a synchronous tutorial with your tutor for 1 hour in which you'll be completing exercises that you'll get before. And then some of these exercises you'll be taking home actually to complete after the tutorial is over, so you can expect to spend another hour every week to finish completing those exercises, and then you get solutions to those exercises so you can confirm that you had them right. There will be a chapter or a paper to read every week, so you can expect, depending on your reading speed, to spend somewhere between 2 and 4 hours completing the reading every week. So that means that you will be spending somewhere in the ballpark of 7 to 8.5 hours of work every week on this module. And then in addition, towards the end of this module, you'll be putting in about 70 hours working on your final assignment for this course. You'll be writing an essay, but in addition to just writing the essay, you'll also be writing and submitting a draft that will then be marked by your peers, so you're getting some feedback before you actually have to submit the final version, something that I will say more about very shortly. The textbook that we're using during the course is from Rotman and Hyam's Introduction to Language, and specifically we'll be using the 10th edition from 2014 here. However, if you go and buy a used copy of this book, it's perfectly fine to buy anything from the 8th or 9th or 10th edition. The chapter numbers can vary slightly, so if you get the 8th or the 9th edition, you might have to look up in the index where specific topics are located, but the content isn't all too different, so it's perfectly fine to buy an older copy of this as well. In addition, there is now a digital edition available via the library, so if you go on UCL Explore and you type in Fromkin Rotman Hyam's Introduction to Language, you will find that copy online there, and you can either read that online in your browser or you can even download a copy to your computer and read it there if you prefer to read online. Of course, even though the teaching for this module this year is mainly online, or perhaps especially so, there is an element of engagement, and it is expected that you will engage with the material. So you should make sure that you watch the weekly lecture videos, and actually we're keeping track of that happening. And you should do the weekly exercises. So this includes the little quizzes that you find after every lecture video on Moodle, but this also includes the exercises that you get in the tutorials. You should, of course, attend the weekly tutorials, and if every now and then you have to miss a tutorial, then it's really important that you try and review the material from the tutorial. So that means going through the exercises by yourself, trying to complete them, looking at the solutions, and when you have any questions, then going and finding one of your classmates and discussing it with them and seeing if there's anything that they have learned from the tutorial or the Q&A that perhaps you have missed that might be useful. You should, of course, do your reading, and I would suggest that you do it in good time. And good time means doing the reading for the week that you're covering at the time and not trying to do all the reading up front or later on. The reason for this is that we are covering different topics, and quite fundamentally different topics at times from week to week. And so it's much easier when you're working on a single topic to do the reading, to do the exercises, to watch the videos, to have the discussion then, than it is to get jumbled up later on trying to revise everything, catch up on the reading for phonetics when now you're covering syntax. You're expected to show at least 70% engagement across these modalities. And in fact, it's quite important because UCL policy stipulates that if your engagement falls below the 70% mark, you may actually be barred from taking the final assessment for this course. So it's really important that you try and engage with these elements, and especially some of them that are tracked online. So showing up to the tutorials, showing up to the Q&As, completing the online quizzes, for example. It's really important because that is a mark for us that shows us how much you've engaged with the material of the course. So please make sure you complete them. And if there is any reason why you can't engage, for example, you have prolonged illness or something else has come up and come in the way, then it's really important that you get in touch with us. So you should get in touch with your personal tutor or with the linguistics teaching team, or if you think that's useful, also with me, and tell us about it so we can make sure that we have a record of this and also that extenuating circumstances are taken into account. There is a communication policy in force on this course. And essentially what this amounts to is that for non-private issues, so anything that's related to just clarifying the content from weeks or perhaps additional questions that you have on material out of interest, that you try and speak to your classmates and post to the forum, which is also, of course, a forum shared with all your classmates. So you have this option of using what we call the Link Cafe, which is an always-on online chat session that's available via the Overview tab of the Moodle page. You can go there, meet up with your classmates and discuss any questions that you have at any time you like, but also you can post your questions to the Moodle forum. There's this discussion forum you'll find also on the Overview tab at the very bottom, and that's where you will have seen these introduce yourself threads, and hopefully you'll have replied to it as well. So if you have a question about any course content or any sort of additional questions about linguistics, this is a great place to post your questions there. And then, of course, also to respond to each other's questions. Really, especially this being taught online this year, we live from the interaction that we have with each other. And it's really important that you try and reply to each other. In fact, as the staff on this course, myself and the teaching assistants, we're going to try and take a bit of a step back from the forums and give you guys a chance to answer each other's questions, first of all, and then we'll step in if there are gaps that need to be filled at the end, or perhaps there's something that we might want to add. Now, for any issues that are private or that you feel otherwise are not suitable to post in a forum where your classmates can see them, you are, of course, invited to just email me. If the issue is urgent, please make sure that you write that it's urgent in the subject line of your email so that I know to pay attention to this sooner than later. And then I will give you a reply either via email or where that is a better way, we can also set up a one-to-one meeting on Microsoft Teams or on Zoom. As for assessment, there are two components of assessment. There's formative assessment and there is summative assessment. Formative assessment are assessment components that don't count towards your final mark, but are rather there to make sure that you're staying on track, that you're learning the material, that you're learning to apply the material that you've learned, and also to give us, your lecturers and your teaching assistants, a bit of an idea of where you're at. And then there's summative assessment, which is assessment that counts for your final mark. So the formative assessment of this course consists mainly of the weekly quizzes that you have after every video that you watch and the homework from the tutorials that you'll be completing. In addition to that, there will be a compulsory midterm quiz. So that is something you will have to complete during reading week, starting on the 9th of November. And you will have the whole week to complete that quiz. That will take about 20 minutes to complete. And you must achieve a mark of at least 70% on this assessment component in order to continue with the course. However, don't worry about having to pass this on the first attempt. You can, in fact, retake this quiz as many times as you like. So this is, if you will, to try and force you to engage with all the various components of the course up to that point and make sure that you're arriving at a good basic understanding. So you can take this quiz 5, 6, 7 times if you need to, but the important thing is that by the end of reading week, you have achieved 70% of correct answers on this quiz. And you have a summative assessment at the end of the course, so your final mark will be based 100% on that final essay, which is an essay of 2,000 words plus minus 10%. The topics that you can write on will be released at the start of reading week on the 9th of November, so you'll get a document via Moodle at that point in which we suggest a couple of topics, but you'll also be able to come up with your own topic that you need to then agree with me. So if you want to write on your own topic, you need to email me during reading week and we can discuss options for an individual topic. You will then have a pre-submission of your assignment before you submit a final version that will go through peer review. So what that means essentially is that you'll be writing a draft. You'll have 1 month to write a draft assignment and you will upload that through Moodle, and then one of your classmates will anonymously get your assignment and they can give you some feedback on how you can improve the assignment, and then you will have another month to work on it before you have to submit the final version. So the deadline for this first draft for peer review is the 6th of December, and then you will have 1 week to give feedback on the assignment that you'll be assigned from one of your classmates. So that's the 13th of December. And you will also only get your feedback back if you have given feedback to someone else. So again, this is not something where you can lean back and just expect that someone will do that work for you. This is a fair exchange. You will give feedback on the assignment that someone else has written and they will give feedback to you. As ever so often, you get out what you put in. And then you will have the final submission of the essay that you can revise with the comments that you've gotten there on the 13th of January 2021, so January next year. It's important to say perhaps at this point that even though there's this peer review element where you'll be getting to see the draft that someone else has written and where you'll be getting feedback from someone else, this doesn't mean that you're otherwise allowed to talk about your assignment with other students or with other people in general. So the rules on plagiarism, on collusion, etc. still apply. The only exception to that is through this mandated part of peer review that is happening via Moodle and that is controlled and that we have a record of. And that is the only time that you're getting a chance to share the content of your essay with another student before your final submission. Now, at this point, I just want to share with you a couple of general tips that perhaps you might be well aware of how to succeed in your study of this module. These are just things that we've discovered over the years, that when students do them, they succeed much more readily than students who don't do things this way. So of course, planning is a really big element here. It's very easy to fall behind and it's very hard to catch up on a course like this where topics change every week. It's very difficult when 2 or 3 different topics have passed in the time and then you're trying to catch up on them all at the same time whilst trying to learn something completely new. So try and stay on top of things if you can. The workload on this module and on other modules often increases somewhat towards the end. And this is not so much because we're giving you more work, but because you have assessment to worry about towards the end of the course. So you'll be working on your assignment in the second half of the course and over Christmas perhaps. And the same thing will apply to other modules that you're taking. So it's important to plan ahead and make sure that your workload doesn't become unmanageable all of a sudden when you come to week 8 or 9 in the course. I would suggest that you make a schedule for all your modules with your weekly commitments. So schedule in when you'll be watching the online videos, when you'll be going to tutorials and Q&As, and when your assignments will be due, and also allot time for working on them, for doing your reading, etc. And then if you fall behind, and perhaps I should say when you fall behind, it's almost inevitable that at some point in some module that you're taking, you will fall behind a little bit. It's important to add the catching up to your study plan. So make sure you have those couple of spare hours every week in your schedule where you can schedule in extra time to catch up on something that you've fallen behind on. Otherwise, that can become very overwhelming all of a sudden. Now, of course, success is also associated with a pattern of behavior. And one thing that I would suggest above everything else with online learning is to make sure that you space out your work. It's ever so easy when everything is available online and you can do things whenever you want, really, to just go and try and do them in one block of 5, 6, 7, or 8 hours at a time. So in other words, to go and binge study. But that's really not the right way to do things. Many studies on the brain have shown that your learning is much better with what we call spaced repetition. So the much better approach here is to spend an hour and a half every day or every other day studying the material for this course and spacing things out. That way, your brain will have much better retention of the material and you won't have to spend so much time revising later on. Do your work, of course, and do your work when your work is due. So when you've completed the videos, go and do the quizzes. When you have the tutorial, don't go and do the exercises. Don't rely on cruise control. It's ever so easy to just lean back, watch the videos, do the reading and think, yeah, that's cool, I understand. And then discover when it comes to your assessment or writing your assignment that you're actually struggling with some concept that you haven't tried to apply before. So it's really important to take part in the active parts of the module. If you get stuck, it's important that you reach out. Don't suffer alone. Don't suffer in silence. If things happen, so this can happen due to content-related things, perhaps there's something you just can't wrap your head around, in which case approach one of your fellow students or approach us, the members of staff on this course. Reach out and we can try and help you with that. But it could also be that perhaps some personal issues come up in your life that make it incredibly hard to move on and that will lead to you getting stuck in some regard, in which case also, you're encouraged to approach people in the university. So first of all, you can reach out to a personal tutor. You can also, if you think that useful, reach out to one of us or to reach out to me or the linguistics teaching team. And we can always point you in the direction of people that can help you if we can't help you directly. There are many people around here that are very keen to help you when you get stuck. So it's just really important that you reach out when that happens. Help others whenever you can. When people post a question on the forum or ask you to explain something to them, take that opportunity and try and explain that to them. Also, if you get interested in something and you perhaps find some additional resources, an extra paper that's interesting, or a newspaper article, or a video or podcast, you can proactively go and share that with your fellow students. Go in the forum, make a post about it, write a little summary to it. That will be very, very helpful, not just for your other students, but it will also be really helpful for you. The best way to make sure that you've understood something a lot of the time is trying to explain it to someone else. So when you help others, you're helping yourself as well. And then, of course, I would like to encourage you to pursue your interests. Inevitably, with the breadth of material that we'll be covering, there will be things that will be less and more interesting to you. But when you happen upon something that seems interesting to you, go out and read more on it, try and discover more and pursue that interest. I myself, for example, when I was a first-year undergraduate student, learned about a phenomenon called mutation in Welsh, and it so happened that 4 years later I started doing a PhD working on exactly that topic, and last year then completing my PhD on exactly that topic. So you never know where some interest, even in a first-year module like this, might lead you to in the end. And then lastly, I would suggest that you do something that is called a study log, or that you keep a study log. What a study log is very simple. Essentially, it's just a reflective journal of your course, a reflective journal of your course of study that you're keeping for yourself. So you write perhaps a page or two every week, not much more than that. And you can write that, of course, in a paper-based journal, or you can just have a Word file on your computer that you jot down things every week. So that will take you perhaps 10 minutes, 15 minutes a week. And in that, you would note down things such as what you found the most interesting that you've learned this week, what you've really struggled with in that week, and especially important, point 3 here, is what questions came to your mind in this week. So this is a really good tool to reassure yourself that you're keeping on track with things, to show to yourself that you're growing, which in turn will give you motivation to keep going, and to get a record of the things that interested you, of the things that you've learned, and of the questions that you had. And perhaps, just like I've said on the last slide, when I was an undergraduate student, I came across this phenomenon of mutation, and later on I came back to that question, and I hadn't touched upon it in a while in between. So it can sometimes be quite interesting to look at the questions that you had a while back and see that now you're in a position perhaps to answer them where before you weren't. And finally, it's of course really important to be prepared for all your live sessions. So these are the live Q&A and the live tutorial. They will be so much more useful to you if you come to them with the right level of preparation. And it really doesn't take very much. The important thing is you try and watch the videos and do the little quizzes beforehand so that you know what the material is that will be covered, and you're in a position to answer questions and to also understand what the questions that other people are asking relate to. I would suggest that when you watch the videos and you do the quizzes, if you have questions, write them down there and then. It's so easy to watch these videos, think of questions while you go, and then forget all about them either by the end of the video or at the start of the tutorial when your tutor asks if you have any questions or anything that needs to be clarified. You often sit there and your mind is just blank, even though you know you had some things that weren't quite clear and you can't remember them now. Because if you've written down your questions, that's also the starting point of writing down your answers. So in the Q&A especially, but also in the tutorials, you'll be going through quite a lot of questions, and your classmates will have quite a lot of questions to ask as well, surely. There is a chance that by the end of the Q&A session, for example, you won't remember what the answer was to the question that you asked if you don't write it down. So I'd really also suggest during the Q&A and tutorial, if you get an answer to a question that you asked, write down what the answer was. And of course, lastly, it's really important that you don't skip the live sessions, don't skip the Q&A, don't skip the tutorial. Even if you think you've understood everything, and even if you think you don't have any questions, it happens quite often, surprisingly often in fact, that it's only when someone else asks a question or for some clarification that you realize that something wasn't quite clear to you either. So it's really, really useful to attend the tutorials and to attend the Q&As, even if you don't think that you need to. And of course, it's also part of what's tracked as your engagement. So the 70% mark here that you need to reach in terms of engagement applies to the Q&As and tutorials as well. So I will leave you with this, and I will see you next week at the Q&A and at your first tutorial. Until then, have fun.